Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Election Day has arrived, and we've been waiting for it for some time. And, of course, I always start out a joke, certainly in my Sunday school class on Sunday, saying, I know some of you are going to miss those political commercials. And I always get this incredible groan that comes from the audience, and I'm sure you probably are groaning as I said that right then. So, in some respects, as the election comes to a conclusion, those ads that we all hate will no longer be on the television set. All of the various announcements, warnings, text messages, and all the rest will end. But it is possible, and we will talk about this later, that the election could go into overtime, and so we may be dealing with some of that in the future. I want to, of course, talk about the national election in just a few minutes, but since this particular hour, we have a very significant number of you that are in the state of Texas listening, I thought I'd talk about that. And even if you are one of those individuals that listens from other states, because we do have some radio stations there, and certainly a number of people tend to tune in early as well online, this will be appropriate to you in terms of your own legislature, because the point I want to make is that although we will, because of the nature of this being a national program, focus most of our time and attention on the presidential election and the senatorial elections, there are very important other elections as well, not to mention those for the House of Representatives. But the point I'm making is for what is happening in the Texas legislature. We will do some of this tomorrow as we bring to the microphone Matt Rinaldi, who was a former representative, and he will actually give us some perspective. But let's look at the numbers in the state of Texas for just a minute, because it's illustrative of what's happening nationwide. More than 9.7 million people in the state of Texas have already cast early ballots. Now, there are 16.9 million registered voters, so in some respects, that still suggests that a good number of people will show up today. And if you would like to call in and maybe tell me about your experience, if you're one of those people who did not vote early and decided to vote today, what did you find at the polls? And we'll certainly talk about that in just a few minutes. And so that is a significant amount, 9.7 million individuals. That represents already a turnout of over 57% and already is more than the total number of votes cast in the last presidential election. So you can kind of get a sense of how significant that really is. The overwhelming majority of those, 8.7 of the 9.7, voted in person. And a little less than a million, it's actually 973,000 mail-in ballots have been returned as of course, October 30th. We are today talking about November 3rd, so there are a few more. In that case, that was the last day of in-person voting. And so we have the ability to start counting those. And so in some respects, we should have some pretty good results from the state of Texas as time goes on. The significance of this is at least twofold. Well, more than that, but I'm talking about some things that people normally don't think about. Obviously, significance of the fact that, indeed, these are individuals who are going to be making laws that will affect your life. But there are two things that people tend to forget about. One of those is the fact that this legislative session will then determine how these various districts are drawn. That would be the Texas House districts, the Senate, Texas Senate districts, the congressional districts, all sorts of other districts that relate to that state board of education, and on and on and on. It's a very complex process. We've had Phil King on this program to even talk about that. And assuming that Republicans do not lose 8 or more seats tonight, then Republicans will hold a majority, and thus they will be primarily pushing forward those various district lines. And, of course, those will be challenged, as they always are. There will be various lawsuits. There will be all sorts of questions as to whether or not it fits the Voting Rights Act, and it will be somewhat tedious. But eventually, for the 2022 election, you will then have new districts. That is going to be important because I haven't looked for sure, but I'm pretty sure Texas is going to pick up another congressional seat, so that's going to redraw those. All the existing ones can be redrawn as well. And the goal oftentimes, nevertheless, is for individuals to draw safe districts. I've jokingly said that when it comes to the United States Senate, the voters choose their senators, but when it comes to the House of Representatives, the representatives choose their voters, because those very safe districts make it much easier for individuals to win re-election. And so that is going to be an important issue. That's issue number one. We'll talk about that a little bit with Matt Rinaldi tomorrow. But what we will spend probably more time talking about is the very first vote that takes place in the House of Representatives in Texas. In the Texas House is the vote for the Speaker. Now, in the past, this Speaker was chosen in a way that is bizarre, if you think about it, compared to, say, way Congress does, because Congress simply goes into the caucus. In this case, it was the Democrats, which have the majority in Congress, and in their caucus, they select their Speaker, which was pretty much a foregone conclusion, Nancy Pelosi, and then they bring it out to the House of Representatives for a vote. And since all the Democrats are going to vote for Nancy Pelosi, it doesn't matter if the Republicans vote for her or not, because that's a done deal. The way it was done in the past, which allowed for people like Dennis Bond and others to be out there, is that they would vote in the general session. And so you would have Republicans that sometimes would actually be more what we call rhinos, Republican in name only. And so some of those individuals actually would then sort of side with the Democrats, and you'd end up with a much more moderate Speaker of the House. Again, if the Republican margin is only 1 or 2 seats, it's possible that one of these Republicans that are more liberal might do that on the floor to try to leverage what was going to take place in the caucus to get a more moderate Speaker of the House. So we'll see where that goes, but it's something we will talk about tomorrow. And in addition to that, Matt Rinaldi has not only written about the forgotten House Speaker race, but also the effect of the mask muzzles, as he calls it, because you have 2 different Republican governors, one which would be Governor Greg Abbott, which has imposed a statewide mask mandate, and he's contrasting that from the Florida Governor, Ron DeSantis, who has not done so, and talks about some of the issues related to that, and concludes by saying, look, you know, if people want to wear a mask, that's fine, but when you have these mandates, there are some other issues, which, by the way, I think might even affect the governor's race, because I have noticed that a fairly significant number of people have not been such supporters of Greg Abbott. So, again, just wanted to have one session where we talk a little bit about Texas. Tomorrow, Matt Rinaldi will be with us, and we'll get into the vote for the Speaker of the House and the questions about the mask mandate and what's going to be coming down the pike and what are some of the issues that will be part of the Texas legislature. And that's one of the things that I've enjoyed being able to do, since we have this first hour that is heard more by people in the state of Texas, because the next 2 hours, of course, are heard nationwide by so many people in states other than Texas. So that's given us a chance to talk about this. We come back, though, somebody's going to be really wrong, because there are widely conflicting predictions on who's going to win tomorrow. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day, and two important questions might or might not be resolved tonight. The first question is, who will win the election? Given the number of mail-in ballots still to count, we may not know. The second question is, how peaceful will be our transition of power? In the past, we've had a few bumps in the road. Back in 1960, there were questions about whether John F. Kennedy won the presidency fairly. Rumors quickly spread that voting in Illinois and Texas had been manipulated. Perhaps the narrow margin of victory indicated that the vote total should be challenged, but Richard Nixon conceded the election because he said, "Our country cannot afford the agony of a constitutional crisis." In 2000, George W. Bush led Al Gore in Florida after the first results were tallied. Because the vote was so close, a statewide recount was implemented. The machine count was even closer, so a legal battle developed. Those of you who are older probably remember the debate over the hanging chads. The case finally reached the Supreme Court that ruled that the hand counts unconstitutional and essentially declared Bush the winner. Al Gore then conceded by saying, "While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it." What about this election? President Donald Trump has made it clear that he might not concede the election if it is close, if there are voter irregularities. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been encouraged not to concede the election tonight. Given the uncertainty, the decision by both candidates is probably reasonable. If one candidate wins the election in a landslide, then none of these concerns cited many weeks ago will actually matter. But if the election is close, or the votes in some battleground states are questioned, the election could go into overtime. We'll know in a few hours. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Love to know who you think might be elected president and what might happen in the United States Senate and Congress and a number of other things. And if you'd like to join us, we would love to hear from you. But let me, if I can, just simply say that you have the widest range of predictions I think I've ever seen. And we've been doing this for a while around this table, so it probably says something right there. Let's take, of course, just the general popular vote, which, as we have pointed out before, and given the fact we've had two elections in the last 2 decades that where the individual who won the electoral vote did not win the popular vote, I don't need to explain that like I probably had to in the past. But if you take one of the polls that was used, the argument here is that Joe Biden leads Donald Trump by double digits. One of the polls, for example, 54% for Joe Biden, 43% for Donald Trump. You can say, well, maybe that poll's way off. Maybe. Here's another one from NBC Wall Street Journal poll. That's 52% to 42%, still about a 10-point margin. And again, whenever somebody has anywhere from 51 to anywhere up to 60%, you have to assume that unless that is over marginal, over measured or over sampled, once you got 50% of the vote, kind of it's all over. So the argument, if you were to look at any of the mainstream press polls, would be that this is going to be pretty much close to a landslide for Vice President Joe Biden. But as we always like to point out, even if you win the popular vote, doesn't necessarily mean that you win the Electoral College vote. So this one coming from one of the particular organizations that looks at this, The Economist, concluded that, again, when you look what they think are the chances of winning the most votes, the argument is that they believe that there's a 19 and 20% chance of that, or maybe greater than 99%, that Joe Biden will win more votes than Donald Trump. When they then take it down to the Electoral College, they still say that they believe in 19 out of 20, so about a 96% chance that Joe Biden will get more Electoral College votes. Donald Trump only having a 4% chance of doing so. So the range, again, don't forget you need about 270 electoral votes. They say that it is possible that Joe Biden might not get 270 electoral votes, but they also predict he could get as many as 415, and that Donald Trump could get as few as 123. They only come up with one possible scenario where Donald Trump maybe in just the most unlikely of circumstances maybe squeezes out 279 electoral votes and as a result then defeats Joe Biden. So those are the doom and gloom polls. Let's look on the other side. I've seen this one more than a few times, and that comes from the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Now, I will say that all the way back in the 1980s, I remember the first time I was as a co-host with Marlon Maddox, we interviewed a member of Congress at that time named Newt Gingrich, and we were just struck by how smart he was. I mean, he really is sometimes the smartest man in the room. At the time, he was using a lot of kind of new age language, and we're saying, you know, he's need to drop that. Well, he dropped that pretty quickly, and of course then was the architect of the ability to win back the House for the Republicans in 1994 with a contract with America, and ever since has really been a very astute commentator. There are times when you will hear Newt Gingrich say something, you're going, not really sure about that, and then 3 months later you go, he was absolutely right. How does he see these things? So you can't just discount him, but you just have to at least say this is pretty interesting because Newt Gingrich is arguing that Donald Trump will win with 324 electoral votes, that the leftists will be totally in shock. And I heard him on one interview saying by the end of this week, some of these polling groups will just go out of business, which I think was a little bit of hyperbole there. But that's what he's saying. He's actually convinced that Donald Trump not only will win, but he will win pretty big, 324 electoral votes. Lest you think he's the only one making that statement, let's find a couple of others. There are some other people that have been looking at those numbers at particular areas, trying to get a sense of, okay, where indeed would actually Donald Trump actually win. And some are coming up with numbers like 322 electoral votes because they're assuming that their surveys show that he's up by 2 in North Carolina, has a narrow lead probably in Pennsylvania, maybe by 1.5 points. He has a lead in Wisconsin by 1 point or more, and that he is winning in Florida by 4 points. He's even going to win Minnesota by 2 points. He'll win New Hampshire by 4 points. And again, you look down these numbers and they're like, woo, there's pretty incredible stuff. And then one more, just so that I can get all the range out there. At Red State, they asked some of their commentators to speak to this issue. And they've done this every 4 years. And they asked them to, first of all, say who's going to win the presidency, what's the electoral vote count going to be, who's going to control the House, who's going to control the Senate, and then what major upset. And Richard Hahn, for example, Donald Trump's going to win. He's going to get anywhere from 300, probably about 340 electoral votes, which is the highest number I've seen anybody come up with. Democrats will still control the House. Republicans will still control the Senate. And the upset he's predicting is Martha McSally, which is out there in Arizona, which most people have already conceded her to lose tonight, but we'll see. Susie Moore, who's a senior copy editor, has something similar. Donald Trump winning, electoral vote anywhere from 295 probably, which was a little lower than most. Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate, and the upset there would be John James, who again is one that most people have assumed is going to remain Democrat, but nevertheless, see where that one goes. Then you've got a couple of others that are predicting different vote counts very similar. And one in particular, which I thought was kind of interesting, is the idea that maybe the Republicans could win the House. That seems like such a long shot, but nevertheless, who knows? And so that is the case. And again, a number of others, when they were picking possible changes, upsets, they're almost all uniformly picking John James, who is the Republican, African-American in Michigan. And if that's the case, then I think you can pretty much say the chances that Democrats could control the Senate are out. Because you have to start, just before we take a break here, with the assumption that most people are making that indeed the Republicans in Arizona, Colorado, and North Carolina will lose. And so that would be right off the bat 3 pickups for the Democrats. But then you have to say pretty likely that you're going to have a pickup for the Republicans in Alabama, so you're down to 2. If indeed you think John James is going to win in Michigan, you're down to 1. And then you would have to say the only way that Democrats could control the Senate is they'd have to run the table and win in Michigan, Iowa, and Montana. Iowa, even though it's listed as a toss-up state, I think is out of the toss-up state category by anybody that's looked at those numbers for 2 reasons. Donald Trump has pulled ahead in Iowa. I don't think it's a toss-up anymore. And because of that, maybe enough coattails keep Johnny Ernst from being defeated. So you have to, if you're a Democrat, come up with 4 Senate seats that switch. And given the fact that one of those switches goes the other direction, you really have to come up with 5. And that makes it more difficult for them to come up with it. So it is certainly possible that you could have Joe Biden in the Oval Office and Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate. Probably not, but who knows? And that's one of the reasons we have elections, because most of those are really hard to predict. So when we come back, again, we can kind of work our way through what works in some of these different states. But if nothing else, it is just a reminder of the fact that Donald Trump is convinced that he is going to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. He was in Michigan and Wisconsin last night. He was in Grand Rapids. He was in Kenosha. He's gone to Minneapolis and Minnesota and Rochester. Some people say he might want to do that if for no other reason to say that he would be the only Republican since 1972 to win Minnesota, that even Ronald Reagan couldn't win Minnesota. So we'll see. I think a lot of this speculation will be set aside very quickly, but nevertheless, I want you to see the incredible range from people that are convinced that this is a blowout and a landslide for Joe Biden, and others that are believing just the opposite, that Donald Trump will get 320 or more electoral votes. Hard to make this up. We'll be right back.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention that about a half an hour from now, we're going to have James Carafano on, and he has, of course, with the Heritage Foundation, been on with us many times before. Wrote a very good piece on how other countries are looking at our election. We're not the only ones watching our election. You know, North Korea, Iran, a number would, I think, probably like Joe Biden rather than Donald Trump because they feel they could maybe do some things with him. China, don't you know, they would love to to have Joe Biden. And so that is something we'll talk about with him briefly. We'll then, of course, get back in some of the issues in the news. In studio with us at the 1:30 hour will be Buddy Pilgrim. We're going to talk about the election and really about the Christian vote and where we go from here. No matter who is elected, I'm going to bring up some things that just simply show us that the younger you are, the more likely you are to kind of believe in some of the ideas being espoused by Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And so, as I've said before on this program, politics is downstream of culture. And if you look upstream in the culture, you recognize that most of those major organizations, major institutions in the culture are certainly ones that are opposed to conservative ideas, Christian ideas, and the rest. So what do we do there? Of course, we'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. With Jim Dennison will be on the program with us. Gary Bauer will be with us on the program, and some more on that regard as well. But just a few minutes ago, I pointed out that almost everybody is saying, oh, we're just convinced that Joe Biden's going to win. And so it'll be the Biden-Harris ticket that will move into the White House in January. But there are two things that suggest that maybe people aren't so sure about that. One is the incredible number of people over the last 24 hours that are talking about voter suppression. James Clyburn, I'm going to give you a quote in just a minute from Joe Biden and others. Now, if you have been in the political arena for a while, or if you've been doing radio like I've done for a third of a century, you know, when people start talking about things like voter suppression, they're trying to give themselves an excuse for why they lost. It is, again, hard to even imagine somebody claiming that there's voter suppression when right now we have record turnout. I mean, I say lots of times it doesn't pass the straight face test. These people with a straight face will honestly argue that there's voter suppression when we have so many long lines and so many individuals voting like never before. I saw a political cartoon that showed somebody standing in line looking at his cell phone saying, oh, I long for the days when we had voter apathy, because these lines are so long and we've got record turnouts in so many different venues. And then to suggest that that's voter suppression tells me they're not so sure they're going to win. And the other one, which I'm going to get to in just a minute, is the fact that these businesses are being boarded up. Now, do they honestly think that there would be riots if Joe Biden won tonight? Well, okay, if you're mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, he says, yeah, I'm really concerned about these white supremacists that are going to cause all this conflict. Again, you know, this man needs to find another position other than mayor of Portland if he seriously believes that the people that over 100 consecutive days were rioting in Portland were white supremacists. Really, I mean, really, let's get to this. But nevertheless, that's the way this game gets played. And it's one of those, don't trust your eyes, trust me. You know, don't trust your lying eyes, trust what I have to say. But here are some great statements that illustrate the point. First of all, Joe Biden the other day, they're trying to do everything they can to suppress the vote. They're trying to do everything to convince people it's an illegitimate vote so they can play games. Well, again, how do you come up with suppress the vote when we have turnout like never before? 98 million already voted. That's 70% of the entire turnout in 2016. There are certain states right now that are at 90% of previous turnout. And you already have, I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Texas, that already has exceeded its 2016 turnout. Let me add some others. Texas, Hawaii, Montana, that have already exceeded their turnout just with early and absentee mail-in voting. Okay? I mean, so that's suppression? I mean, seriously. But nevertheless, you're going to get the argument being made, and this one is most concerning because the state of Pennsylvania may be the key state this time. So you would hope that the attempt on the part of the individuals running the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, would do everything they can to make sure it's fair. You'd be disappointed. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who's a Democrat, actually, and by the way, who's tasked with ensuring that the Keystone State's election is conducted fair and lawfully, said, if all the votes are added up in Pennsylvania, Trump is going to lose. Now, he could have just simply said, we're dedicated to adding up all the votes. But no, if we add up all the votes, Trump's going to lose. So he's already given you the conclusion before we've added up all the votes. Do you see the problem here? And this is why some people have said, do you think this is going to go into overtime? Well, if Pennsylvania is necessary either for a Biden win or a Trump win, yeah, I think so. But we'll see. It may be over very early tonight, but that will only be if there's a landslide that is really beyond what one of those sides never predicted. But let's also recognize that when they're talking about these various conflicts and the concern about what's going to happen tonight, there was a statement that Joe Biden put out on Twitter. I suspect somebody else put it out for him. And Joe Biden said, "I promise you this, I'll end Donald Trump's chaos and end this crisis." And that just was too much for Representative Dan Crenshaw, who's the representative from the 2nd Congressional District here in the state of Texas. And so he immediately put out a piece that said, "Trump's chaos? Last time I checked, businesses weren't boarding up their windows because they were afraid of Trump supporters." We know what would be the riots and those kinds of things because we know who would bring them. One of the articles I've posted here is one that appeared in the Free Beacon, Businesses in Major Cities Prepare for Election Day Violence, in which Alex Nestor says businesses in major U.S. cities are preparing for another round of rioting, looting, and vandalism, which they anticipate will follow Tuesday's presidential election. Plywood boards now cover blocks of storefronts in New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, and elsewhere, as some business owners worry the election could stoke another, if you will, wave of civil unrest that strained the country this summer. Business associations and local police are coordinating safety strategies with retailers to prepare for violent protest. Of course, we're getting the National Guard involved in all sorts of things like this. Which brings me to another piece, which I could post if we need to, by Rich Lowry, in which he calls it the boarded up election. Because he argues, everybody knows the same rioters who have ransacked businesses in the name of social justice for months are the ones that will actually be coming again if Trump gets 270 electoral votes. As much as I'd like to say everybody knows that, I think I've just proven to you that a lot of people don't know that. But again, he points out that if you look at these businesses right now, they're boarding up like they're expecting a Category 5 hurricane bearing down. And he says, everybody's right now, he said, being very coy about why. The police in Beverly Hills worry about protest activity. Tiffany and Company refer to potential election-related activity. Saks Fifth Avenue says it's taking precautions in event of civil unrest due to the current election. But as he points out, there's no doubt what we're dealing with here. There isn't any possibility that the local women's Republican club is going to take to the streets if Joe Biden wins in a landslide. Love that line. And he said there are certainly some malefactors, he says, on the right who should be called out and shunned. And he says it's disgraceful that Trump has spent so much time preparing the ground to argue that if he's been cheated if he loses. Yet the point that Rich Lowry's pointed out, the left are the one that has the numbers. They've also have the penchant for violence. The best estimate is now $2 billion of property damage this year, and they are the intellectual enablers to put parts of America on a crisis footing in anticipation of its possible shock and upset on November 3rd. And so that's why he says, I would think most people actually know that this is from the rioters, but if nothing else, he also takes on the fact that, once again, we keep hearing this comment about voter suppression. And Rich Lowry says this is a bizarre charge in an election in which about 100 million people have voted early. And overall turnout is going to smash the 2016 record. The cry of voter suppression is best understood as itself a powerful tool for turning out voters rather than a description of America with its unprecedented voting. So, if nothing else, it does indicate to me when you start hearing comments about voter suppression and concerns about possible rioting that even though there is almost a smug confidence on the part of most of these prognosticators in the mainstream media and in these polling organizations, they still are holding out the real possibility that it could be an upset tonight. And, of course, we may or may not know that as we enter into this very volatile election season. We come back, I wanted to end with just a very good piece that Tucker Carlson had about what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, one of the things that an election does is it causes for at least some people that are willing to do a little bit of reflection, a chance to actually wonder why or ask why the election went in that particular direction. And I think the piece by Tucker Carlson last night is relevant whether Donald Trump wins re-election or is defeated tonight, because in some respects he's hearkening back to why do we even have Donald Trump in the Oval Office in the first place. And there is a tendency, I think, sometimes for individuals to simply not take responsibility for what has taken place. And I think it is very clear that those individuals who were shocked when Donald Trump won 4 years ago, that instead of saying, let's maybe ask ourselves, why is it so many people voted for this man that we didn't even give a chance to? a man that was doing Celebrity Apprentice. How in the world did he end up in the Oval Office? And so maybe we need to reevaluate our message. But instead, there was a tendency to say, these are just deplorables. These are just a bunch of rednecks. They don't know what they're talking about. And we'll just see what we can do to get him out of office as quickly as possible, instead of having a little bit of reflection on this. And this is something I'm going to do in about a half an hour from now with Buddy Pilgrim, because whether indeed this election goes one way or the other, there is a very good piece by Dr. Jeff Myers, who is with Summit Ministries, been on the program many times before in Washington Times, and I quoted it the other day, in which he points out that a lot of church-going Christians, nevertheless, aren't fighting this leftward current. They're swimming with it. They are less likely to believe in absolute truth. They're more likely, much more likely to believe in socialism. There's going to be a real need, no matter what happens, it's an election, to say, if we're going to educate the next generation about worldview, and we do a millennial roundtable, and we're going to do a lot more, there is a real need for that. But the point that Tucker Carlson was pointing out is that the other side has not been asking that question, because he points to a rally that President Donald Trump did in Butler, Pennsylvania. And he said, quote, Butler is like a lot of places you'll find in this country once you head inland from the coast. It's a former industrial town. They made Pullman rail cars there for many years, but it's been losing population for decades. We still have nice people in Butler. For $60,000, you can buy a decent house there. It's a place where you might be happy in, but our professional class is not impressed by Butler. They don't consider Butler, Pennsylvania, or places like it the future. To them, places like Butler are an embarrassing relic of the past, best forgotten. The men of Butler may have built this country, and they did that, but now the leaders essentially are ignoring them. He talks about the number that died of drug overdoses. They even built a memorial to the opioid overdoses there. But nevertheless, Tucker Carlson goes on to say, given all that, it was interesting how the people around Butler feel about Donald Trump. Here's a picture of President's rally here on Saturday night. Shows this picture. It's just wall-to-wall people. He says tens of thousands of people came, so many people that the crowd obscured the horizon. It looked like a visit from the Pope. When was the last time a political speech drew that many people? But again, instead of looking into why so many people in a small town would show up on the political rally, the mainstream media just panned it and said, oh, it's just a super spreader event, and didn't go and ask, why are so many people turning out on a cold night on Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania? So Tucker Carlson asked the same question. Why did all these people come? They must have known that Donald Trump is the most evil man who's ever lived. They've heard that every day for 5 years. They know that people who support Donald Trump are also evil. They're bigots, they're morons, they're racist cult members. They know that Americans have been fired from their jobs for supporting Donald Trump, not to mention kicked off of social media, belittled by their kids' teachers, shunned by decent society. Only losers and freaks support Donald Trump. People in Butler knew all that, but on Saturday, they went to a Donald Trump rally anyway. And he goes on to talk about, how, again, they had a feeling, and they have had this feeling for years, long before the 2016 election, that America's elites kind of just forgot them and didn't really value what they were doing. And so even though they recognize that it may not necessarily be unpopular among some of their peers, and certainly among the elites in both coasts, to come to a rally, they came there anyway. And he points out a little bit later in the piece, I thought it was very powerful, that indeed Tucker Carlson said, when we saw Donald Trump running, we really didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And yet there was something that really connected. And he, in a sense, came out of nowhere and did something that gave people a sense and a voice. And he says Trump grows because they, that is the elitist, failed. It's simple as that. If the people in charge had done a halfway decent job with the country they inherited, if they cared about anything other than themselves, even for just a moment, Donald Trump would still be hosting Celebrity Apprentice, but they didn't. Instead, they were incompetent and narcissistic and cruel and relentlessly dishonest. They wrecked what they didn't build. They lied about it. They hurt anyone who told the truth about what they are doing, and that's true. We watched. And he said, America's still a great country, the best in the world, but the ruling class certainly did not pick up on that. And he said a vote for Trump is a vote against them, and that's what's going on in this picture, and that's what's going on in this country. You know, again, I would think that if Donald Trump won re-election, there would be some soul-searching, but I doubt it. If indeed tonight he loses and Joe Biden wins, then it will also, I think, reinforce to many individuals that we don't need to pay attention to all of those issues and all of those people and all of their struggles. And yet, again, the election of Donald Trump 4 years ago, and even the ability of him to attract these incredible crowds, says that there is a real sense that there's nobody out there really fighting for our jobs and fighting for what we actually believe are important and true. So it's a question that I think more and more of us are going to have to be asking that question. And as I said, we'll spend some time talking in the next hour with Buddy Pilgrim about what can we do, because after all, as I love this, Jeff Myers points out in his Washington Times piece, conservatives have spent almost $5 billion trying to reach a very small percentage of undecided voters. He said, by contrast, the amount spent by every college, nonprofit group, and campus group to prepare young adults to apply a biblical worldview amounts to about 12 hours of election-related advertising. So his conclusion is spending $100 to fix a problem that could have been prevented for $1 is crazy. And so I think we're going to need to spend more and more time, at least soul-searching, even if the other side does not, and saying, how is it that there have been so many people that have been feeling like they're left behind? How is it that we have a younger generation that wants to vote for free college and free health care and thinks socialism is better than capitalism and believes that Marxism is compatible with Christianity? And maybe it's about time for whatever happens tonight for us to refocus some of our priorities and consider what we want to do in the future. That's kind of our dedication here at Point of View, and that's certainly what we're going to be talking about in the coming days, weeks, and months, and even years in the future. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, James Carafano with us. He's an individual that served in the administration in the past. He was with the Heritage Foundation, and a very good piece on really what many other countries are concerned about in terms of this election. Why are so many other countries watching this election with almost the same intensity that we are? And then we'll get into a conversation with Buddy Pilgrim about how to educate not only the younger generation, but even some of the oldsters to begin to apply a biblical worldview to everything that they see in the world and even in the world of politics. Let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is Election Day, and I hope you've already voted, and you would probably be of the 100 million people that already have, but certainly a lot of other individuals as well that are going to vote today. And so if you have not had a chance to vote, make sure you go out and indeed cast that very important vote. And we will be, of course, tomorrow talking all about what are some of the results, although I suspect there are some examples of where this election will go into overtime in terms of a Senate race out of Georgia, maybe even the presidential race. So we'll see where that takes us. And so as much as you are watching what is going to happen today and tonight, I thought it would be also very good to kind of start out by talking about how other countries are also paying attention to the U.S. election results. And so one of those articles that we've posted actually is on the Heritage Foundation website, Why China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea care about U.S. election results. And that is written by an individual who's been on the program with us before, James J. Carafano, who is the leading expert on national security and foreign policy, also serves as the vice president of the Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, author of a number of different books looking at a number of things, which you might get into in just a minute, the whole issue of the internet in national security. 25-year, I should say, Army veteran with a master's degree and a doctorate from Georgetown University, and joins us now by phone. So, James, Dr. Carafano, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
Let's see if we can talk about this, because we are paying attention to this election. But if nothing else, there are other people that are poll watchers as well. And I guess we could just run through them one after another, because in your article, you point out the fact that Russia is also paying attention to this particular election that is transpiring today.
Yeah, I think of the ones that we really focus on as kind of threats to global stability, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, the Russians probably care the least about the results of the election. And this is very Putin-esque. I mean, Putin is essentially a classic bully. He blusters, he pretends he's a puppet master, he's pulling all the strings. But the reality is the Russians don't really have a lot of cards to play. Their economy is in bad shape. They have internal repression. He's got problems in his own backyard dealing with the war in Azerbaijan and Armenia, Belarus. He's not going anywhere in Georgia. He's not going anywhere in the Ukraine. He's in Libya. I mean, not Libya. Well, he's not going anywhere in Libya, but he's in Syria, and that's a very costly endeavor, which isn't really producing much. So, he's worn out his welcome in the West, and nobody's really of a mind for another Russian reset. So he probably, of anybody, won't really benefit one way or the other with the election result.
And one thing you mentioned there, it's something we forget about. We always focus on our own country, but COVID-19 and the corruption and some of that has really weakened that country and its economy as well, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Putin just does not have a lot of cards to play. And I think either a second term of a Trump administration or a Biden administration, nobody is kind of going to throw him a lifeline. So I think of all of them, he pretends that he's, saying stuff on one side or the other, but it's all just bluster.
For sure. Let's get to a couple others. One of them is North Korea, which you kind of refer to as a wild card for a lot of different reasons, right?
Well, I think it's actually an open question. whether the head of North Korea, Kim, actually wants to improve the life of the people of his country. And if he does, the only real path forward is to denuclearize, get rid of his nuclear weapons, and then normalize relations with the West. I don't know if anybody is confident whether or not he's really serious about that. Here's what I do think. He trusts Trump like he's never engaged with any other Western leader in not only his life, but in the decade since the Korean War. If there's going to be a deal, if he's reelected, and we'll know within a year if there's going to be a deal. But I think if Trump's not reelected, I think we'll go back to kind of where we were. There's just no other real path forward here.
And I think it illustrates, again, the nature of our elections, because in some respects, people were saying, well, what will Kim Jong-un do? Well, I think he's going to wait it out and see whether or not he's going to have to be dealing with a re-elected Donald Trump and then trying to cut a deal, or whether maybe he can bring some pressure on a newly elected Joe Biden. So in some respects, it shows those kinds of ideas and how that sometimes changes because of the imminent election. So there is a wait and see. But let me talk about the two that probably most people would most likely think of, and that is, what about how Iran looks at our election right now?
Yeah, and I got to say, on the North Korean one, I really want my cash back on that one, because I had said all along the North Koreans are going to sit this out. They're not going to be terribly provocative. They're going to wait and see the results of the election. And, man, I nailed that one. So kudos to me. Iran is really interesting. I think, of course, Iran, they're all rooting for Biden. Just frankly, it's not political comment, it's a fact. And that's because the administration the Biden team has repeatedly said that they would go back to the Iran deal. That's what they say. But here's the problem with that. Either for a Trump or a Biden, with just giving Iran the get out of the jail free card. There's enormous cheating going on. How would you account for all the cheating? Nobody really wants to take the arms embargo off the Iranians. Nobody really wants to use with cash that they can send to all their surrogates in the region, which are destabilizing the region. We just made enormous strides in normalizing relations between its Arab neighbors, and all that was really designed to block Iran. They wouldn't really appreciate very much, essentially, giving them a pass. So it's easy for a Biden team that's not in the White House to say they would do that. They would actually find in practice it's very, very difficult. And for Trump, he is trying to pressure North Korea to do a deal. He couldn't give a sweetheart deal to the Iranians because the North Koreans would say, well, we want that. I think conversely, he can. If he gets the North Koreans to do a deal, that will put even more pressure on the Iranians to recognize there is no other option. So I'm not so sure things are going to be as easy for the Iranians as they think if Biden wins. And I don't think that they will wear him front down if he wins. He'll just stick at it.
But again, it's very different between sending cash in pallets over to Iran and instead issuing an arms embargo. So there is obviously, from their point of view, a very difference in those two candidates. But we need to take one of those mandatory breaks. When we come back, I wanted to save for last perhaps the most significant, and that is the very different way that President Donald Trump looks at China and the way former Vice President Joe Biden looks at China, for all sorts of very good reasons. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read this, again, I always encourage you to go to heritage.org. I'm a supporter. I would encourage you to be one as well. And we have this particular article, Why China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea Care About U.S. Election Results. And Dr. Carafano with us, and we'll come back and talk about that issue of China, which, of course, has been in the news, and give you a chance to really join the conversation as well. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Then we'll spend some time talking about the importance of this election. But I thought we'd start out by saying we're not the only ones watching this election. So are other foreign countries. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day, and two important questions might or might not be resolved tonight. The first question is, who will win the election? Given the number of mail-in ballots still to count, we may not know. The second question is, how peaceful will be our transition of power? In the past, we've had a few bumps in the road. Back in 1960, there were questions about whether John F. Kennedy won the presidency fairly. Rumors quickly spread that voting in Illinois and Texas had been manipulated. Perhaps the narrow margin of victory indicated that the vote total should be challenged, but Richard Nixon conceded the election because he said, "Our country cannot afford the agony of a constitutional crisis." In 2000, George W. Bush led Al Gore in Florida after the first results were tallied. Because the vote was so close, a statewide recount was implemented. The machine count was even closer, so a legal battle developed. Those of you who are older probably remember the debate over the hanging chads. The case finally reached the Supreme Court that ruled that the hand counts unconstitutional and essentially declared Bush the winner. Al Gore then conceded by saying, "While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it." What about this election? President Donald Trump has made it clear that he might not concede the election if it is close, if there are voter irregularities. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been encouraged not to concede the election tonight. Given the uncertainty, the decision by both candidates is probably reasonable. If one candidate wins the election in a landslide, then none of these concerns cited many weeks ago will actually matter. But if the election is close, or the votes in some battleground states are questioned, the election could go into overtime. We'll know in a few hours. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Please have with us for a few more minutes Dr. James Carafano, and again, he is with the Heritage Foundation. Go to heritage.org to find some of that material. Also, we've posted this particular article here, why other countries actually are paying attention to our election. That would be China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I saved China for the last because it is the one that is perhaps most significant, as we now have learned from the New York Post articles and a variety of other sources. And I think there would be a striking difference between how this current president or the possibly elected president, actually would really like to and interact with China. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, China's different from Iran, North Korea, and Russia in that of countries that we really worry about as kind of global bad boys. But China have a lot of cards to play. And regardless of who gets elected and the policies they choose, in part they're going to have to respond to how the Chinese choose to play the United States. So the interesting evidence that we've seen in the past few weeks is that the Chinese strategy is shifting, and it's shifting more internally, consolidating internal control over the country, really focusing on the domestic economy, both from a consumption standpoint and independence of production. So it's really, in a sense, making China resilient to a world which is increasingly tough on China. That's actually good for U.S. policy. And the one thing that should not change, regardless of who wins the election, is our current policy of being tough on China, leading the world to be tough on China and pushing back against all their malicious actions, whether they're security-related or economic or political. That's exactly the right strategy. And the very last thing we should do now is change that approach.
One of the things you mention in there is 5G, and it's a reference to some other things that the administration is doing, trying to counter the spread of the 5G networks. I've had people ask us questions about that before. Can you give us kind of an update on where we stand in terms of the implementation of the 5G network coming out of China?
Yeah. Well, when people think about 5G and they go, what's the difference? It's just another G. And in terms of the ability to use telecom and network things together and process vast amounts of data, the difference between 4G and 5G is like the difference between a paper and pencil and a supercomputer. I mean, it's just incredibly more computing potential that's distributed across the network, which one means, if somebody maliciously gets access to that, it creates incredible vulnerabilities. But on the other hand, there's enormous economic potential, so the stake could not be higher. So because essentially you cannot secure a network from a malicious actor that builds the network, the United States has said, look, we're not going to let the Chinese build 5G here. And they pressured other allies to do that because across our infrastructures are interrelated. So Europe, which is the big battleground, this administration's really been remarkable. Several countries have already come online, including Great Britain, and has said, look, we're not allowing 5G in here. A number of other countries are leaning that way. There's actually the number of countries that would actually permit 5G in Europe is actually very, very small. Now, there's other places in the world where the Chinese are probably going to capture the market. Africa is probably the leading one. But the great threat, essentially, the Chinese taking over the internet, if we keep on the trajectory we're on, that threat's been blunted.
Very good. One of the things that I know you've spoken on is the whole idea of cyber warfare. And I remember when your book, Wiki at War, came out almost a decade ago, talking about the internet and national security. That was kind of prophetic back there in 2011, 2012. But it's even more relevant today in light of what we know in terms of some of the issues in the internet, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So I was a little ahead of. But, the real, I think, insight, I think, is, people say internet, networking, social networking, everything else. What really matters is where powerful social networks in the internet connect to real-life networks on the ground. I mean, Lady Gaga can have 8 million, followers. But if there's not a human network on the ground that operationalizes that, it doesn't mean very much. That's why these media stars and everybody else that tweet and everything else about who to vote for, it doesn't really impact anything because they're not connected to a human network. But when a social network is connected to human people on the ground and can operationalize that and they feed into each other, it can have tremendous impacts both for good and for ill. So one of the things we're seeing, for example, is you see all this violence across in these seats like Portland, Seattle, and everything. That's a real life organized criminal activity with real people and real money.
Yes.
And they're enabled and empowered by what they're doing on the internet. So those things, the evil things, evil feeds evil, and good feeds good. I mean, I think that's the big lesson learned. Don't just look at the social networks. Look at the human networks underneath that, which are much, much more important.
Again, if people wanted to know more about the Heritage Foundation, find some of your articles, including this one, which we've also put it on our website at pointofview.net. They can find that at heritage.org, can't they?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the great things about Heritage is they produce research on virtually every aspect of American society, and it's all freely available, all transparently right there on the website. Or you can just do a search, just type in heritage and, voter fraud or voter integrity and whatever you're interested in, and you'll probably get a bunch.
A lot of great material at Heritage Foundation. And again, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View, and look forward to the next opportunity.
It's a real honor. Thanks for having me. Great show.
I'm going to take a break, and just before we do so, let's, if we can, talk about some of the predictions. And I might just mention in just a minute, we're going to have Buddy Pilgrim in studio. We'll talk about some of these issues. But somebody tonight is going to be wrong. Of course, we may not know tonight who the next president is, but let's just take two extremes to illustrate my point. That is, if you look at The Economist, they have done the what they think are the odds of, indeed, Joe Biden winning the most number of votes, winning the popular vote, and they've give him a 99% chance of winning the popular vote. Donald Trump just a 1% chance of winning the popular vote. But of course, you're not elected by the popular vote, as I think most of us know, and now we've had two examples in the last 2 decades in which that is the case. So when you look at what their estimates are for the likelihood of winning the Electoral College vote, they still give Joe Biden a 96% chance and Donald Trump a 4% chance. Of the range, they say, could go as high as 415 electoral votes. Don't even believe that at all. And then, of course, they do acknowledge there's a possibility Donald Trump could get as many as 279 electoral votes, but they're figuring more in the 100 range. So that's one extreme in which they're saying there is not a chance for Donald Trump to win tonight. On the other hand, let's just pick Newt Gingrich. He's been on this program with us really since the 1980s. I remember when Marlon Maddox and I first interviewed him as just a young congressman in the 1980s from Georgia. Then later, of course, was the architect of the very significant, if you will, focus on the 1994 election. And that was very important, in which Republicans for the first time took over control of the House of Representatives. But nevertheless, with that particular idea, we've seen so often that Newt Gingrich has oftentimes had a very good prediction of what might happen in the future. And interestingly enough, Newt Gingrich is saying that he is convinced that Donald Trump will win tonight or in the next couple of days with 324 electoral votes. In case you wonder, you need 270 to win, and that leftists will be in total shock. And I heard one interview where he even suggested that some of these polling organizations will go broke by the end of the week. I think that's a little bit of hyperbole, but if you only need 270 electoral votes, and right now Newt Gingrich, who gave us the contract with America back in 1994, predicts that Donald Trump will win with 324 electoral votes, you can see that somebody's going to be very wrong here, because we have probably the most divergent predictions I've ever seen before. And those are just two of a number of others that we have seen. And so a lot of that is, of course, going to depend tonight on what happens on some of the so-called swing states. That's North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, but especially is it possible that Donald Trump will once again win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, even hoping to win Minnesota. And so we'll have to see how that plays itself out, because if nothing else, this is going to be a very interesting night to watch. Whether we'll know by the end of the evening, I'm not sure. I know at least one election, probably the senatorial election in Georgia, will go into overtime and not be resolved till the runoff in January 5th. But will we know tonight? We'll see. And, of course, if indeed Pennsylvania is key to either of those campaigns to winning, I suspect it goes into overtime just because of the need to count all those mail-in ballots. So let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time kind of talking about the election, some of the issues here, and most importantly, where do we go from here? I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what it's going to take to educate the next generation about what's at stake. We see more and more young people that accept socialism rather than capitalism as the best economic system. So there's a lot of work to do no matter who wins tonight. Let's take a break. We'll spend some time with Buddy Pilgrim in studio right after this.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First article here, the different closing arguments from the two presidential candidates, and I thought you might appreciate that, appeared in The Hill. Why other countries care about our election. We just talked about that just a minute ago with Dr. James Carafano. And then major cities prepare for violence and vote no on 1984. I'll get to that in just a minute. It's a piece by Victor Davis Hanson, which I thought was very good because he said, you know, you could wake up in 2022 and have 15 persons Supreme Court, Senate without a filibuster, a nation without an electoral college, and an attempt to add 2 more states so that you give you 4 more senators. So some people say, I guess there is a lot more at stake than just a beauty contest here. And so we have in studio with us Buddy Pilgrim. He is the president of Integrity Management Services and the founder of Integrity Leadership. As we've mentioned before, he was the national director of faith and religious liberty for Ted Cruz's presidential campaign. And most importantly, I want to point you to Liberty Line, which is your television program, which people can follow on Victory Channel. And I'm going to, I think, be on there with you sometime in the future. But nothing else. It's great to have you back in studio today.
It's wonderful to be in studio. I always enjoy being on the air with you.
You know, when you were with Ted Cruz, you got a chance to meet Donald Trump. I've never met him, probably never will, but you got to see him in action even as he was sort of getting started in his political campaign, didn't you?
I've met him several times, but the first time I ever met him was when I was working on Ted Cruz's campaign. I think we were at Tony Perkins' convention that he has every year. All the Republican candidates were speaking. I arrived early because I was part of the advance team for Ted Cruz, and I was in the green room. I knew Trump was actually, I stayed over late, what it was, because Ted had already spoken. I wanted to hang around and meet Trump because I knew he was showing up next. When he walks in the room, he's got this larger-than-life personality. I will tell you this, though. He is a genuinely warm and friendly man. He had no idea who I was, who the other people in the room were, except for some. Gary Bauer was in there and some people like that he probably knew. Rick Santorum was in there. He certainly knew who Rick was, but he didn't know who I was. But he walked around, said hello to every single one of us. He looked us in the eye. I had a pin on at the time that was a kind of an unusual pin. It's a cross with a Star of David in the center of it. And he looked at that and he says, very unusual cross. Never seen that before. I really like that. He paid attention to it. Then he asked me my name and what I did and those kind of things. But one of the most interesting things about him, and I think this may be what you wanted me to share, is when he walks into the room, he goes over to some of his advance team that had already been there. And he said, who's already spoken? And they said, well, Marco Rubio's spoken. Ted Cruz has spoken. You're up next, and then Rick Santorum is after you. And he goes, okay, how did Rubio and Cruz do with the crowd? Of course, this is a very conservative evangelical crowd. And they both said they did terrific, got standing ovations several times. And he said, what were their standing ovation lines? Now, his crew obviously knew to be paying attention to that. And he reaches in his jacket pocket, pulls out an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I could see it. It's his handwriting all over the page, everything on there, nothing typed. And they tell him the 3 top applause lines that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio hit that got people get on their feet for a standing ovation. He wrote those down. And then when he went out there and gave his speech, he nailed every single one of those himself and got the same standing ovation. And it's just insight into, I don't really think that means he's a phony. I think it shows how smart he is. And there's nothing he said in those lines that he fundamentally disagreed with either. I mean, those were things he easily endorsed. He just made sure that he hit those points. One other thing, and I've had my picture made with hundreds of politicians over the years, many presidential candidates, things like that. I've never had this happen with him. So I asked him if I could have a photograph with him. He said, absolutely. He takes my phone, hands it to one of his staffers. They say, get a picture of Buddy and I. So they take the picture. The staffer's reaching back out to hand the phone back to me. And as he's handing it to me, Trump reaches out and he just grabs my phone out of his staffer's hands. He says, let me see that. And he looks at it and he says, it's not good enough. Take another one.
That is amazing. The times I've been with you, you've told some of those stories, and I thought it'd just be great for our listeners to know that because it gives you a little bit of an insight on who he is, whether he is reelected or whether this will be a one-term presidency. But what are your thoughts? You've been looking at this for some time, and you look at the map here, and if you tell me who is going to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, or even any 2 of those 3, I think I can probably tell you who the president is, but nevertheless, these battleground states are those that are going to be the ones we're going to be watching tonight, isn't it?
They are the ones we're going to be watching, and I can't tell you this from having studied all the numbers. I've been looking and listening to everybody on television as well, the pundits, the analysts that run the numbers on it. But more than anything, I've been watching the enthusiasm of the people across the country. Not only the sheer number of people that are showing up for Donald Trump's events that he's having, but the fact that they show up with a MAGA hat, they show up with a MAGA mask on, they show up with a red T-shirt on, with Trump clothes on, with their flags waving. The level of enthusiasm is comparable, in my opinion, only to what you would see for somebody rooting for a Super Bowl team. And I think that level of enthusiasm that you see for a Super Bowl team is dominant throughout the United States. I think President Trump is going to win every one of those swing states. I think he's going to sweep them. I agree with Newt Gingrich. Newt said he's going to get 324. I think he'll get that many or more. I think it's going to be a very decisive victory.
Again, if indeed that is the case, and it's just as easy to go the other direction, but if it is, that would, I think, hopefully lead to some soul searching on the part of these polling organizations, because you have Cahaley at the Trafalgar and a couple of others that are predicting a Trump win, but almost everybody else, Nate Silver and all the people that are actually doing this, predicting it going the other direction. And a lot of that, I guess, gets back to something, Buddy, I want to talk about, and that is a commentary I did last week on the shy Trump voter.
Yes.
Now, I hate to use to say shy, because some of them aren't shy, but they aren't just real forthcoming. And when they see a phone ring and they don't know who that is calling, they don't answer it. And even if they find themselves on a conversation with a pollster, they're more likely to say, well, I'm just not so sure. And if you go up and down some of these neighborhoods that you know overwhelmingly last time voted for Donald Trump, you just don't see a lot of Trump signs up there. And maybe it gets down to those of us that lived in the state of Texas a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago, I saw a lot of Beto signs and hardly any Ted Cruz signs. You worked, of course, with Ted Cruz and know who ended up winning that election, right?
Yeah, he did. Now, part of that was strategy. Ted never believed in yard signs because Ted thought yard signs are only about name ID, and he already had high name ID, so he didn't want to spend money on yard signs. Now, obviously, Trump has a tremendous name ID. The reason that people have been reluctant to put out Trump yard signs, and I was early on, we didn't put ours out until about the last month. I don't want my cars damaged. I don't want my house damaged. Some of that has happened. Now, we have a home where we live. I also have another piece of property where I'm going to build a new house. And I put signs out, a lot of Trump signs out on that one, and those signs were torn up. And I don't mean they were just stolen. I mean they were mangled by someone who came around there. So the neighbor that lives just down the street from us where we're staying right now, that neighbor is a Trump supporter. And at first they said, if you get some Trump signs, get us some too. We got them, told them about them, and they changed their mind about putting them up, not about voting. So there's two kinds of shy Trump voters, I think. There are conservative Republicans who are concerned that their house is going to be damaged or that liberals are going to do something like that or think badly of them if they vote for Trump because he's got some strange ways they think. But I think there are also a large number of Democrats who realize that the differences that we have to choose from in this election are the most stark we've ever had before, and they're not buying into this socialism, government control, not just socialism, but they understand the choice that's on the ballot is really freedom or not.
Yeah. And, of course, your organization and your TV show is called Liberty Line, and it kind of gets back to something I want to talk about maybe when we come back from the break, just the need for education. That's one of the things you and I are both believing in. And I'm looking at this, young church-going Christians embrace anti-religious socialism, and that comes from our good friend Jeff Myers' research. Christians have lost the next elections because the younger generation are more likely to not believe in absolute truth, more likely, 5 times more likely to believe socialism is better than capitalism, more likely to have maybe identified with some of the issues of radical race theory and a variety of other kinds of things. So in some respects, whatever happens tonight or in the next couple of days, we got a lot of work to do to really educate the next generation, don't we?
We do, but we know where we can get the foundational information to educate them, and that's from the Word of God.
Yes. Let's take a break, though. Let me give you a chance to join your conversation. Last time we had Buddy Pilgrim on. Some of you called after he left, and if you want to call and he is still here, feel free to give us a call right now because we'll let him get on to his busy day as well, and we'll all be watching what is happening. Let me just mention we do have a couple of things we'll also talk about. The boarded-up election. Rich Lowry said, everyone knows the same rioters who ransacked businesses in the name of social justice are coming again if Trump gets 270 electoral votes. Although I did notice that the mayor of Portland was saying, no, it's all the white supremacists that are showing up. Those ones that over the 100 consecutive days were white supremacists. But nevertheless, we'll see that. And I love what he says there. It's not the local women's Republican club that's going to take to the streets if Joe Biden wins the election. But we have a lot more to cover, and we're going to do that. But we'll also give you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Next hour, we'll get into a little bit more about how some of the major cities are preparing for violence and a couple of other issues. But we were talking for a few more minutes with Buddy Pilgrim. And one of the things I know that you are dedicated to is really trying to provide that biblical foundation. And so whether it's Liberty Line or Point of View, or let me mention the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, or of course, I just mentioned a minute ago the work of Jeff Myers at Summit Ministries, they're just a real need to provide that biblical foundation, because the younger you are, the more likely you are to believe that maybe socialism is better than capitalism, more likely to believe that government is the answer to your problems, and big government is a good thing, and maybe you even believe in free health care and free education, free college, and of course, somebody has to pay for that, but that's another whole story and another day. But what about this idea of getting a good, solid biblical foundation?
Well, there's no better place to get your values from. And the Bible has the answers for every single issue that we deal with in life. We were talking about this issue of equality earlier, and Kamala Harris just put out a video that talked about equality versus equity. It was a real strange thing in terms of these two positions she juxtaposes. And her answers didn't, in my opinion, really even make sense, because she said equality suggests, everyone should get the same amount, saying that like it's dismissive of it, okay, and everyone shouldn't end up with the same amount. And then she goes through this explanation, but here's where she ends up. But she says equitable treatment means that we all end up at the same place. Well, that's the same thing as getting every amount. That's equality of outcome.
Right.
And our Constitution doesn't promise equality of outcome, but the Bible doesn't either. Two of my favorite parables to contrast it or to talk about are the parable of the pounds and the parable of the talents. Now, the pounds is in Luke chapter 19, 11 through 27. This has to do with equal opportunity, because the master brings his servants in, gives 10 of them 1 mina each. That is equal opportunity for all. He gives them all of them the same starting place. One of them goes and earns 10 from his one. One earns 5 from his one. One does nothing with it. The one that earns 10, his reward is proportionate to what he earns. He said, I'm going to put you in charge of 10 cities. The one that earned 5, his reward is proportionate. He said, I'm going to put you in charge of 5 cities. And then the one that did nothing with it, he took it away and gave it to the one that earned 10. Now, if you contrast that to the parable of the talents, though, and I think this is the order in which you have to read these. You read them in Luke first, because that's equal opportunity. Parable of the talents has to do with distributing something to people based on their talent and their proven ability. Mm-hmm. So this is like round 2 of this. So he calls in and he gives one of them 5, one of them 2, and one of them 1. So you say, oh, that's not fair. Well, yes, it is, because it said he gave to each one according to their talent. In other words, they had already proven what they could handle. And he was right, because the one that he gave 5 earned 5 more. The one that he gave 2 earned 2 more. And the one that he gave 1, 2 earned nothing. Now, the interesting thing about the 5 and the 2 is they both earned 100% return on what they had been given. So their earnings, or what they generated, was directly proportionate to what had been entrusted to them, which was proportionate to the talent that they shown that they had. An interesting thing about the rewards that they got, it's not a numerical reward that's described for the talents like the other, where they generated 10, got 10 cities, generated 5, got 5 cities. They both generated 100%, and the reward that's described in the talents said you will be put over much. The exact same words for both of them, because they both had proportionate returns of 100%. So the Bible doesn't promise equality of outcome. It promises equality of opportunity, and then blessings based on what you do with what you've been given.
You know, I've seen some real interesting commentaries, even from people that would be very supportive, generally politically, of Senator Kamala Harris, to that comment about equality and equity and all the rest, because equity sounds a little bit more, like I said, like socialism. You know, yes. It's not equality of opportunity, it's equality of outcome. And the only way you do that is lower everybody down to a lower standard. And so we can certainly see that as well. Let me, just before I let you go, though, on Liberty Line, you've had Star Parker on, an African-American woman, ran for Congress. Incredible story, which if people are not familiar with it, should follow it. But it got me thinking, one of the big issues in this campaign, and I know they're going to be following this tonight, is the African-American vote. Yes. And last time, Joe Biden, or at least this time, Joe Biden is hoping to attract the African-American vote, but really Hillary Clinton looks like she actually attracted more African-American vote than Joe Biden will. And Donald Trump, he really only got about 8% of the African-American vote, but you've been talking to some African-American leaders that are convinced he's going to get a lot more than 8%. Yeah.
Starr's convinced he's going to get a substantial part of the African-American vote, both male and female. I spoke to Bill Owens yesterday, who runs the Coalition of African American Pastors. Bill thinks there's going to be at least 20% of the African American males that are going to vote for President Trump. And they both see this groundswell that's taking place in the black community, where people are understanding that the Democrats have been lying to them for years. They've been promising them things but not doing anything for them. And they treat them like they are incapable of accomplishing things on their own. Whereas President Trump knows if you just give somebody the opportunity, they have the opportunity to lift themselves up. So I think we're going to see a substantial increase in the Black and African American vote for President Trump this time around.
Dr. Merrill Matthews with us on Friday. And of course, his piece that came out in The Hill argued, looking at almost every one of those surveys, show that there are probably going to be a higher percentage of African Americans voting for Donald Trump and a higher percentage of Latinos or Hispanic Americans voting for them. And again, if you start looking at this electoral map, that helps you in places like Arizona, which is considered a battleground state, New Mexico, which is assumed to be one in the Biden category, and even in Florida. So if indeed you do have an increase in the Hispanic vote, that helps you in some of those states. But I think last time you could almost make the case, because we've had some African-American individuals on this program who've said it really might have been the black vote in Pennsylvania that gave Donald Trump Pennsylvania, and those 20 electoral votes are going to be key for him tonight, isn't it?
Absolutely. They're going to be critical. Pennsylvania is certainly the keystone state. Everybody's going to have their eyes on it tonight, and I think there's going to be a massive turnout, particularly in rural Pennsylvania, because energy is such an important issue. But this energy issue doesn't affect just people who are in a state where they frack or just people who work in the oil industry. It affects every single one of us. I heard one of the employees that work in a fracking company interviewed on television. He did such a good job of explaining this. He said, listen, it affects everybody who has a natural gas heater in their home for their hot water heater, a natural gas heater for their air conditioning system, a natural gas stove. And ultimately, the Democrats want to do away with natural gas as a fuel. And if you do, then you've got to retrofit all those houses with electrical outlets that are less efficient, all those kinds of things. It's not a practical thing to do, and it will impoverish the nation to do that.
Yes. Well, again, we just have so much more to cover, but we'll just get you back on here because in a few days we'll have a chance to figure out what is going to happen in the future. Let me, first of all, again, encourage you to go to our website, or you can go to govictory.com. Either way, you can find that and find out more about Liberty Line, and it is a political talk and interview program. You can get it on DirecTV, Dish, Roku, and a variety of others, and Buddy, it's always great to have you in studio with us.
It is always a pleasure to be here, Kerby. What a great show you have.
We are going to take a break, and we'll come back. We'll get into a couple of issues in the news, but most importantly, we're just kind of biding our time till we actually know what is indeed going to happen for tonight and tomorrow. It is quite possible that some of these elections probably will go into overtime, especially the special election in Georgia. Unless you get 50% of the vote, probably will then be decided January 5th.
Yep.
And let's hope that that isn't to determine who is going to control the United States Senate. But nevertheless, we'll see how that one plays out. And we'll certainly spend some time giving you a little bit of better look at what is going to happen, we think, tonight in the presidential election. But let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, I want to get some perspective on what is happening in your neck of the woods, because we broadcast all over the country. Just had a chance to hear from a moment ago from an individual that I work with that actually is working in the polls today. Said that not of individuals, quite a number actually, that are first-time voters. So that's kind of intriguing, and that's all the more difficult for individuals that are doing poll valuation to actually estimate what will happen when you have people that have never voted before. We're not just talking about 18-year-olds. We're talking about a number of other people who haven't voted in years, and so that is certainly the case. And so if you would like to call in and share some of the things that are happening in your area of the world, we would love to hear from you. That number is 1-800-351-1212. But I thought we would go, first of all, to the state of New Hampshire. And, of course, there are 6 radio stations that actually carry the program there. And I believe we have on the line now Sharon Malone. Sharon, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. What a privilege and a blessing. Yes, we're here in New Durham, New Hampshire with WSCW 88.7.
And again, one of the things that I think I heard, I believe it was from your husband, but I want to thank you for coming on here as well, is that you have all sorts of people standing in line, and you wonder whether or not you're going to be able to get everybody that's ready to vote and wanting to vote through there in time before the polls close. So tell us what you found out.
Well, what I'm hearing from my friends in various towns and in my own town, we had a lot of distancing at the polls where we vote, but we're a small town. I have a coworker who was in Farmington, New Hampshire, and she said that she and her husband got in the line inside of a high school where they have their polling place, and it went all the way down the hallways. And about 10 minutes later, they looked, and it was going out into the parking lot. So they were pretty amazed. And then I have another coworker who went with her elderly father. They were voting at a school gymnasium and in Rochester, New Hampshire, and they were so overwhelmed they couldn't find a place to park, and her dad could no way stand in that line. And I asked, can't you take him up to the front? Maybe he can, get you. If you tell them they're elderly, I think they'll let them in first. And she goes, oh, no. She said, there were a lot of elderly people waiting in that line. I couldn't do that. So you can see that it's just amazing. And, of course, you all know about Dixville Notch here in New Hampshire. And we're just so blessed to live in a free country. I said to some of the poll workers, I said, isn't it great to be an American? It's wonderful, Kerby.
Well, it is. And again, the best estimates are we have at least 101 million people that have already voted. And, of course, those numbers are going up every hour on the hour. And, of course, we are expecting record turnouts. And, Sharon, one of the things I mentioned in the last hour, maybe you had a chance to hear it, is that there was a political cartoon that showed a man standing in line to vote and looking at his cell phone and saying, oh, I long for the days of voter apathy, because these lines sometimes are pretty long, and apparently up there in New Hampshire they are. Every year, you probably heard me say we go to Vermont, but I need to sneak over there to New Hampshire sometime, say hi to you, and thank you for carrying the program, and I really appreciate you calling in today.
Sure. Well, thanks. And could I just add one thing is
Please.
that my friends in Farmington had their Trump stickers on, and they were asked to take them off. So Anyway, great program. Thank you, Kerby, for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for partnering with us. That opens up a line if you'd like to join us. I'd love to hear from some of you that perhaps you have actually had a chance to vote today. I know so many of you have already voted. And as I said just the other day, if you have already voted, still feel free to take access to some of the resources that we have on the website, the iVoter Guide. Still pass that on to somebody that maybe you are just running into that said, well, I didn't think about voting. We posted all sorts of great material about the importance of one vote and the importance of voting, even if you're in a state where you are convinced that the state's going to go the other direction. And most importantly, I want you to recognize that certainly because we're a national program, we're focusing most of our time and attention on the presidential election, and then secondarily also focusing some time and attention on the U.S. Senate for a lot of different reasons. But if you also want to understand, we have 535 members of Congress, 435 of those in the House and 100 through the Senate. Then you add to that there are 13 governors' races, and we have basically, I think it was 67 or 68 of the 99 state legislatures have races, and then you go down to the mayor's races and city council and school board and all the rest. Almost 40,000 different elections that will be decided today. And so we certainly want you to understand how important it is to vote at those particular levels. But since we are at the moment looking at some of the things happening around the country, one of the big issues, of course, is not only who the president will be, but what will happen in the United States Senate. In order for Democrats to take over the United States Senate, they would need to get 4 additional individuals that are Democrats replacing Republicans. Right now, the assumption usually is that indeed there may be an opportunity for Republicans to, actually I should say it the other way around, for Democrats to pick up some states, maybe in Arizona, Colorado. Some people have even talked about North Carolina. But you certainly have kind of moved Iowa out of that particular situation. And most importantly, if you have to pick up 4, I just mentioned even 3, and I'm not sure all 3 of those would be pickups, because then you have one that will go the other direction, I suspect, in Alabama. Possibility of one going another direction in Michigan. So at this point, doesn't look as likely that Democrats will control the Senate. It is much more likely that Democrats will still retain control of the House. And perhaps the most important issue of all, of course, is who the president is. But let's, if we can, take some more phone calls here. We'll go up to Alaska, KJNP. Curtis, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thanks for having me. I want you to know that at 7:15 this morning, it was 25 below zero. I went to the polling station, and it was packed. The church where we vote, the parking lot was packed. Inside was packed. It was packed. I went back 2 hours later because my wife left her wallet there, and it was still packed, Kerby.
And again, for our listeners down here in the lower 48, they can't even imagine 25 below zero. But that's what you have to deal with up there in Alaska. So thank you for voting. And again, just there are just record lines in so many places. And we've taken you in the moment from New Hampshire all the way to Alaska. Curtis, I got to go to a break. Anything else you want to add real quick?
I don't want to hear any sniveling about it raining.
That's for sure. Great line. Let's take a break. And if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And it just illustrates again that we are going to have record turnout. And that is certainly going to be significant. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people have to say we really don't have a good handle on that. As I shared last hour, Newt Gingrich thinks Donald Trump will win with 324 electoral votes. Others are predicting that Joe Biden will win. We'll only have to wait a few more hours to find out. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is Election Day, and two important questions might or might not be resolved tonight. The first question is, who will win the election? Given the number of mail-in ballots still to count, we may not know. The second question is, how peaceful will be our transition of power? In the past, we've had a few bumps in the road. Back in 1960, there were questions about whether John F. Kennedy won the presidency fairly. Rumors quickly spread that voting in Illinois and Texas had been manipulated. Perhaps the narrow margin of victory indicated that the vote total should be challenged, but Richard Nixon conceded the election because he said, "Our country cannot afford the agony of a constitutional crisis." In 2000, George W. Bush led Al Gore in Florida after the first results were tallied. Because the vote was so close, a statewide recount was implemented. The machine count was even closer, so a legal battle developed. Those of you who are older probably remember the debate over the hanging chads. The case finally reached the Supreme Court that ruled that the hand counts unconstitutional and essentially declared Bush the winner. Al Gore then conceded by saying, "While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it." What about this election? President Donald Trump has made it clear that he might not concede the election if it is close, if there are voter irregularities. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been encouraged not to concede the election tonight. Given the uncertainty, the decision by both candidates is probably reasonable. If one candidate wins the election in a landslide, then none of these concerns cited many weeks ago will actually matter. But if the election is close, or the votes in some battleground states are questioned, the election could go into overtime. We'll know in a few hours. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of the booklet, A Biblical View on Pornography, go to viewpoints.info/pornography. That's viewpoints.info/pornography.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, I just mentioned a minute ago that Newt Gingrich thinks that Donald Trump might actually win the presidency, be reelected with 324 electoral votes. Let's give the other side, just to be fair, and The Economist has an estimate that Joe Biden is got a 96% chance of winning the Electoral College, a 99% chance of winning the popular vote, and could get as many as 415 Electoral College votes. As I said, you only need 270. Well, don't we have, I think it's about 578 Electoral College votes to get 415, really just gets you down to almost, I guess, then Donald Trump would get 123. Is that right? Yeah, if I'm doing my math real quickly here. And so if nothing else, you're talking about some widely divergent predictions being made here. And somebody is going to be quite wrong. For those that are absolutely convinced, though, that this is already over and that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the president and vice president elect, there are a couple of indicators apart from the polls that are saying, well, they're not so sure. And one of those is the fact that you've had a number of people now start talking about voter suppression. As our good friend Gary Bauer, who will be on with us tomorrow, points out, sometimes when you hear people talking about voter suppression, that's a way to cover the possibility that they might lose. And James Clyburn talked about that. Matter of fact, interestingly enough, Joe Biden was talking about this idea of voter suppression. And I have this piece here by Rich Lowry. I love what he says. This is the most bizarre charge you can actually make in an election where already we have 101 million people that that already have voted, and the turnout is now going to smash the 2016 election. If you haven't been paying attention, certain states, Texas, Montana, Hawaii, off the top of my head, already have surpassed the 2016 vote totals. The cry of voter suppression is kind of hard to say with a straight face, yet these people are saying it with a straight face nevertheless. So that's one indicator. The other is the one point I mentioned just a few minutes ago, and that is the number of places around the country, major cities, New York City, Washington, Los Angeles, Chicago, boarding up various stores as if they're expecting a Category 5 hurricane. And again, as I said just a minute ago, it isn't because they think that the local woman's Republican group is going to take to the streets if Joe Biden wins tonight in a landslide. But nevertheless, everybody's real coy about what they're really doing. The law enforcement and police in Beverly Hills talk about protest activity. The Tiffany and Company talk about potential election-related activity. Even Saks Fifth Avenue says it's taking precautions in the event of civil unrest. But I think we know that that is not going to be coming from the right. Now, I'll be the first to admit, and certainly Rich Lowry says there have been a few malefactors on the right who should be called out. But the point is, it's been the left that has done all the damage. The best estimates are up to about $2 billion of property damage that have come, and that the intellectual enablers of that have been pretty much on the left. So that is kind of what people are gearing up for, on the possibility that we will know tonight that, for example, in this case, that Donald Trump has won re-election. Or I suspect we may have to wait another day or two, maybe even a week, maybe even a month, who knows, to find out who is the next president of the United States. But what's at stake, I think, is best illustrated by the other article I've posted here. And this is by Victor Davis Hanson. And what he did was basically call it Vote No on 1984. Now, of course, that's based upon the book, which also became a movie, 1984, in which he says, in some respects, that's what we really are talking about, because he said, you know, it is possible that we could wake up in 2022 and have a 15-person Supreme Court, a U.S. Senate without a filibuster, a nation without an electoral college, and an effort to admit 2 more states with 4 more senators that would guarantee even more significant Democratic majority in the Senate. And he says, why would we blow up a 9-justice Supreme Court after 151 years, or a 233-year electoral college, or a 170-year Senate filibuster, or even 60 years in which we had a 50-state union? And those are all traditions that would be smashed if indeed those individuals that are talking about this or rumoring about this would actually have a chance to do that. And it takes us on by saying that we also know that anywhere from 99.7% to 99.8% of those under the age of 60 who are infected with the coronavirus survive the disease. We know that more we lock down everybody under quarantines, the more we scatter our resources and begin to harm the economy. And he says, and really asks the question, in which administration, Joe Biden's administration or Donald Trump's administration, will more Americans die or come ill under quarantine from increased substance abuse, family and spousal abuse, medical procedures and surgeries, from depression, from suicide, even the loss of their livelihoods and those kinds of things? And then again, he asked the question, you know, who is going to be the one that is going to be most likely to lock down the schools or open up the schools and to begin to do what is going to be important for today's youth, and also for the 20-year-olds and younger Americans who are nearly immune from the infection. And he says, are we nuts to wonder why our healthcare professionals swear us in petitions that demonstrating in the streets, packed with people screaming, often without masks and sanitizers, benefit the mental health of the oppressed, but sitting in a pew in a church is insurrectionary and nearly felonious. And so, again, he takes on some of those issues as well. And he says, has any reporter even asked Joe Biden to assure us that Hunter Biden's emails are indeed Russian disinformation, that he never met a single one of Hunter Biden's foreign lobbyists and agents, that none of his income came from foreign interest through his son. And so he just raises all sorts of really important questions about that. And then in light of the whole issue of social media, he takes on the whole issue of Twitter and Jack Dorsey, who was the founder. You may remember that he actually did testify in front of the Senate subcommittee, which is headed up by Senator Ted Cruz. But he points out that Jack Dorsey, like the late 19th century railroad conglomerates, operates a virtual octopus, as do Facebook and Google. Their tentacles squeeze out all of their competition. They're vertically integrated. Long ago, they strangulated competitors and censored and rigged their operations in a way that assures that they are neither operating in the public domain, he says, like a utility, nor subject to antitrust and anti-monopoly laws that tend to reappear when moguls express open contempt for their customers. And again, he asks the question, which candidate, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, is more likely to rein in the big tech? And he says in 2023, will our Google searches, Twitter accounts, Facebook posts become more massaged and warped under a President Trump or a President Biden? And so, again, those are some really important questions he was asking, and then even concludes by saying, did we learn something about the politicization of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, in their attempt to cobble together a smear against Donald Trump as an illegitimate president because he colluded with Russia? And what happened there, and were not the FISA courts lied to and deceived, and evidence altered by the FBI? And it's important that in this particular document that we've put together, that was written by Victor Davis Hanson, to remind us of the 4 years we've been through, and maybe looking ahead at what the next 4 years could look like. And we'll have enough time, I'm sure, in the next few weeks to talk about what that looks like in the future. But I thought it was a very good piece, and it's one of the articles we posted here on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'll also leave this last half hour for your comments or questions. A lot more to cover, but I certainly wanted to hear from some of you, and maybe you have some thoughts about what is happening in your community. Maybe you went out and voted, and you can tell us what the lines look like in your community. So feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get into a couple of other very important issues in the news as we wait for the results to come in. And they'll be coming in tonight, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow with our good friend Gary Bauer, as also with Jim Dennison and others who will join us as we try to make sense of what happened in the election of 2020. Let's take a break. If you'd like to join us, that number again, 1-800-351-1212. These articles you can find at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Off air, we were just talking about this, so it's probably important to just mention this for just a minute, because after all, you need 270 electoral votes. The state that has the most electoral votes would be California, because it has 53 members of Congress and 2 senators. You got the members of Congress, House of Representatives, and then the 2 senators. And so that's 55. Texas has 38, which, again, we were just talking about this a minute ago. Texas was listed for a while as a toss-up state. I never believed it, and now whether it's Charlie Cook or Nate Silver or anybody else, they're all saying that Texas is leaning Trump, and that's 38. But if you could tell me that Joe Biden wins the state of Texas, it's over. There's no scenario by which Donald Trump can win without the state of Texas, because he needs those 38 electoral votes. And so that is certainly one of the reasons why Kamala Harris came to Texas the other day. Not that they thought that they would win it, but they wanted to give it at least a shot. Now, then you jump down to the next set of states, and these are going to be important. 29 electoral votes you assume are going to go to Joe Biden, but then the other 29 electoral votes in Florida. Here's another scenario. If Joe Biden wins Florida, I think they estimate that his percentage of winning is almost 80 to 90%. If he doesn't win Florida, it drops down to below 50%. So it shows how important those 29 electoral votes in Florida are, and also illustrates why both Donald Trump and Joe Biden spent a lot of time in Florida, not just, in Miami-Dade where both of them appeared, but also in Tampa and a number of other places. And then another supposed toss-up state right next to it, I have trouble believing it, but I'm just giving you the numbers that they say, is Georgia with 16 electoral votes, North Carolina with 15 electoral votes. Those are supposedly toss-up states. Of course, they also listed Iowa as a toss-up state. Don't think so now, but, it could go the other direction. Very quickly, you come up with a scenario by which Joe Biden has a number of different pathways by which he gets the requisite 270 electoral votes or more. The path for Donald Trump is much more narrow, because you assume he wins a lot of the Midwest, good portion of the South, but he has to pick off some other states. And the ones that he picked off last time against Hillary Clinton, 20 electoral votes in Pennsylvania, 16 electoral votes in Michigan, 10 electoral votes in Wisconsin, all by very small numbers, were enough for him to go over the top. He's also spent time in Minnesota. There's only 10 electoral votes there, but I think just in part just to have the idea that he would win the Midwest, and he'd be the first Republican since Richard Nixon in 1972 to win Minnesota, maybe is part of the reason. So nevertheless, that's the electoral map. Recognize again that some of these states will have very quick answers to how many people have voted, because they have rules that require that you actually have to have your ballot in ahead of time if it's a mail-in ballot, and many of them are allowed to start actually counting right now. Others can't count until the end, and then you have Pennsylvania, which says we could actually get ballots for 3 days after the election. So that, if again, Pennsylvania is key either to Donald Trump or to Joe Biden to win the requisite number of 200 electoral votes, then we really won't be able to answer that question tonight. We'll probably go into overtime until all those ballots are counted. So that's just a little bit of electoral math. But I thought just before we wind down the program today, there is, I think, a real value, whether you win an election or you lose an election, to maybe do a little bit of self-reflection. And I talked a little bit about that with Buddy Pilgrim. We recognize that the younger you are, the more likely you are to accept and really believe in certain liberal ideas. My little commentary here on campus unrest talks about the coddling of the American mind, which was written by Jonathan Haidt, as well as by Greg Lukianoff. And it just reminds us that some of these ideas, frankly, some of these really crazy ideas on college campuses have made their way out into society, made their way out into the corporations and into businesses, and we have a cancel culture and a lot of other things that originally had its origin on a college campus. My most recent booklet is called The Biblical View of the Liberal Mind, because I take you through, okay, how is it that individuals hold to, and what are some of the assumptions that people hold to, or their liberal or leftist ideas, and so I go through some of that as well. And that is, I think, important for us. But what is so striking is 4 years ago when Donald Trump won, was there a great deal of reflection on the part of some of the liberal elites to say, why is it so many people voted for Donald Trump? Maybe we need to rethink our message. But instead, the tendency was simply to say, oh, this is just a bunch of deplorables that voted for him. We'll do our best to get him out of office. And I thought Tucker Carlson last night reminded us of that kind of dismissive mindset that has not been very helpful over these last 4 years, because Tucker Carlson took us to a Donald Trump rally. Actually, it was just a picture of a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. And here's what Tucker Carlson said. He said, Butler's like a lot of places you will find in this country once you head inland from the coast. It was a former industrial town. They made Pullman rail cars there for many years, but it's been losing population for decades. They still have nice people in Butler. He says for $60,000, you can buy a decent house there. It's a place you might be happy in, but our professional class is not impressed by Butler. They don't consider Butler, Pennsylvania, or places like it the future. To them, places like Butler are embarrassing relics of the past, best forgotten. The men of Butler may have built this country, and they did, but they mean nothing to our leaders now. Goes on to talk about the fact that because of some of the depression there, they had people dying of drug overdoses, opioid overdoses, and they even built a memorial in the center of town. But anyway, Tucker Carlson goes on to say, given all that, it was interesting how the people around Butler feel about Donald Trump. He said, here's a picture of the president's rally there on Saturday night. It's an incredible picture if you haven't seen it. Tens of thousands of people came, so many people that the crowd obscured the horizon. It looked like a visit from the Pope. When was the last time a political speech drew that many people, he asked. And then he says, why would they actually do that? Because he points out that instead of the media looking at this and asking a question, why would so many people show up? The mainstream media simply panned it as a super spreader event and left it at that. So then Tucker Carlson asked the question, why did all those people come? They must have known that Donald Trump is the most evil man who has ever lived. They've heard that every day for 5 years. They know people who support Donald Trump are also evil. They're bigots, they're morons, they're racist cult members. They know that Americans have been fired from their jobs for supporting Donald Trump, not to mention kicked off of social media, belittled by their kids' teachers, shunned by decent society. Only losers and freaks support Donald Trump. People in Butler knew all that, but on Saturday, they went to a Donald Trump rally anyway. And the point is, he said, this is what the elite should have been asking themselves 4 years ago, or even asking themselves right now. Why is it that millions of individuals voted for Donald Trump? Why is it that tens of thousands of people show up in these rallies? He's, of course, connected with something that the mainstream media, the liberal elite in the academy and in the news and entertainment fields just simply do not understand. And he says that it's partially because the elites simply ignored all those individuals. He says Trump grows because they failed. It's as simple as that. If people in charge had done half a decent job with the country they inherited, if they cared about anything other than themselves, even for just a moment, Donald Trump would still be hosting Celebrity Apprentice. But they didn't. Instead, they were incompetent and narcissistic and cruel and relentlessly dishonest. They wrecked what they didn't build. They lied about it. They hurt everyone who told the truth about what they were doing, and we watched. And he said, you know, America's still a great country, the best in the world, and yet for many, the ruling class dismisses all of that. And he said a vote for Trump is a vote against them, and that's what really was going on in that picture that he showed. And I think it's a good example of the lack of self-reflection and the lack of considering what has been really happening in this country. If tonight Donald Trump wins re-election, you're going to hear all sorts of hue and cry and protest and everything, and just a condemnation of the people that voted for him, instead of saying, maybe he's tapped into something we need to think about. And, of course, if he loses tonight, and, of course, if Joe Biden wins, then this will be just an aberration and will never be considered again. And so, in some respects, I think Tucker Carlson helped us understand that Donald Trump didn't need to go and do all this. He could still be doing Celebrity Apprentice, but he decided to run. Nobody gave him a chance to win. Nobody gave him a chance to win re-election. And here we are on Election Day, wondering what the future might hold. Anyway, let's take a break. We got a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes as we wind down today. I thought once again we just might talk about how we have not been well served, I guess is a nice way to say it, by people that are supposed to educate you about what is taking place in society. And some great examples I'd like to use over the next few minutes, maybe again sound a little self-serving, because if nothing else, maybe it makes the case for why we do what we do here at Point of View. Because whether the news is good or bad, we try to just simply cover it. And right now, we've had incredibly good news about the economy, and you would not even know it. A good example is on Friday, we actually posted a piece on what is now being referred to as the economic snapback. Now, to be fair, I did write about that on October 23rd, so you can find that commentary in which we pointed out that when we had the lockdown and there was a incredible drop in GDP, the real GDP went from about 19 billion down to, I guess, about 17 billion in round numbers. Again, I'm looking at a chart and extrapolating pretty quickly, so I could be off a little bit on that. But it's, again, that was probably one of the biggest drops that you've ever seen. It looked like something during the 1930s Great Depression. And so the argument which was made is that now we will get a V-shaped recovery. And nobody argued for that other than, well, there were one or two individuals that talked about that, but they were all in the Trump administration. So, you know, who do we believe those? Some talked about a U-shaped recovery. Some even talked about kind of a Nike swoosh that eventually it would come up. And yet what we found, interestingly enough, is this is one of the sharpest economic snapbacks in the history of the world. And you had all sorts of questions being raised about whether or not this would continue. And I pointed out that at the time last Friday, we eventually had to post a piece that came from the White House. I always expect to post something from Associated Press, Washington Times, Washington Post, New York Times, something like that, but never just from the White House, because after all, you know, of course, everybody's going to pat themselves on the back on the White House, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Donald Trump. I understand that. But that's the only place where I could honestly see somebody who honestly showed that if you look at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, real GDP grew by 7.4%, or as an annualized rate, 33%. Now, all the mainstream press covered it when it dropped by when it was negative 33% on an annualized rate. Nobody hardly covered it when it was a positive 33%. And in my commentary on October 23rd, I point out the fact that we had had an unemployment rate that reached a high of 14.7%. It dropped below 8%. And again, you would hardly know that, certainly by watching the media, and you certainly wouldn't know that by looking at most of those campaign ads. Another example of what we talked about Friday is a commentary I have coming out next week, and that is what I call media groupthink. And that is, we talked about a man by the name of Glenn Greenwald, who was one of the founders of a group called The Intercept. The Intercept was founded in large part because he was very concerned that when you do various news stories, many of these news outlets where he felt unfairly pressured by corporate interests. If you're not familiar with him, he's the one that probably is best known for his criticism of the surveillance state, which was established by President George W. Bush after 9/11. And he was convinced that corporate power kept him and even other people from reporting important stories. So that's why he created The Intercept. Well, then he ended up resigning from the organization he started, which was supposed to be shielded from all the partisan economic pressures and all the corporate pressures, because what? Well, his fellow editors would not allow him to publish a column talking about all the documented evidence of corruption within the Biden family. Why? Because they recognized that the Biden corruption story could actually influence the election. And as I've said before, when you had Twitter actually shutting down the New York Post, which is the oldest newspaper in America, the fourth largest newspaper in America, and it closed it down until the end of day on Friday. Can you believe this? The Twitter account for the New York Post was shut down until last Friday. And so you have individuals in social media that have completely censored the story. You had people in the news media that have actually ignored the story, or in some cases labeled it as Russian disinformation. And there again, where the individuals that were hoping to at least cover a very relevant story, simply did not cover it. And it's just another really great illustration, I think, of the fact that we've not been well served by the media. But I alluded to this, and I thought I'll end with this one. I don't think we've been very well served by some of these polling organizations, and I guess tonight we will find out, because I have a commentary that came out last week on what are called the shy Trump voters. And what it means is that there are certain individuals that simply will not tell a pollster how they were going to vote. And so one of the writers at 538, which is a very reputable polling organization, said they found very little sign of shy Trump voters. A report from the American Association for Public Opinion Research found no evidence for such voters. And yet in my commentary, I quote from one individual that says this is the classic example of appeal to ignorance. In other words, the absence of proof is the proof of its absence, which is crazy. I mean, by definition, a shy Trump voter is kind of hidden. And so they rarely respond to phone calls, respond to texts, especially from numbers they don't really recognize. And if they do respond to a pollster, they're not likely to be forthcoming. So some of the individuals that are predicting a Trump win tonight are saying there are other ways to find those Trump voters, but you don't do it by your traditional methods of polling. And so here is just another good example of where the mainstream media and many of these polling organizations are tied to these corporate interests, and the mainstream media want to do what they can to actually focus on their kind of story, their kind of polling, and ignore the fact that so many of them were wrong 4 years ago. Will they be wrong tonight? I don't know, but certainly 4 years ago, those of you living in the state of North Carolina know that only so well, because North Carolina in 2016 was supposed to go to Hillary Clinton overwhelmingly. She supposedly had a 7-point lead in North Carolina, and yet we all know the rest of that story, because Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina by 3 percentage points. That's a swing of 10 percentage points just in that state alone. You can work your way through some of the other states, not the least of which is there's only been one or two that it predicted that Donald Trump would win Pennsylvania last time, or Michigan, and of course we know the rest of that story. So the point I'm making is that not that we always get it right around here at Point of View, but I'm willing to give you as much information as possible, even if it hurts our particular cause or our particular candidate or our particular viewpoint, because if nothing else, we really want you to understand that that's why we call it the Truth Team. We really want to try to give you as much of the truth as we can. We've got all sorts of great articles we've posted on the website today, but most importantly, I think we'll all be watching what happens tonight. And tomorrow we'll be talking with our friends Gary Bauer, Jim Dennison, and a variety of others about what has taken place and what the impact that we'll have in the future in this country. So thank you for listening to Point of View, and I hope that when you join us tomorrow, we'll be able to give you as much information as we possibly can. It will be a long night, and I'm looking forward to it. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.